Morning, everyone. I am Mark Callan. I'm the Grant Program Coordinator for the Local Government Grant Program. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us. And also with me today on this webinar is Michelle Scalise, our Grant Section Manager, and also Jody Belfi, the Grant Program Coordinator for the Recreational Trails Program. And both Jody and Michelle will be monitoring the question and answers box. If you have questions during the webinar, feel free to type them into the question and answer box, and either Jody or Michelle may type an answer right back to you if it's something that they think they can answer just quickly and easily. If they think it's something that will be relevant for the whole group, they may actually interject your question into the discussion so that I can go ahead and answer it for the benefit of the whole group. Of course, we'll have time for questions and answers at the end. And then always, of course, if you have questions beyond this, feel free to shoot me an email or give me a call. That's what we're here for. We're here to answer questions for you. So this will be recorded and posted to our oprdgrants.org website within a matter of a couple of days. So you can refer back to this if you would like to. And with that, let's get started. Today, we're going to cover just a brief history of the local government grant program itself, where the funding comes from, who is eligible to apply, the types of projects that we can deal with, and we'll touch on the scoring criteria and the collection of required documents that are required for the application. We'll discuss the online application process itself, and we'll talk about the presentations themselves and the timeline, and of course, we'll answer your questions the best that we can. The program came about in 1998 when voters passed ballot measure 66, the Oregon Lottery Revenues for Parks and Conservation. This dedicated 7.5% of state lottery proceeds to the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department. Of that money flowing into state parks, 12% is dedicated to the local government grant program. At that time, the Land and Water Conservation Fund was up and running in the state, had been functioning since the 60s. And they said, what should we make this new program look like? And the Land and Water Conservation Fund was serving the state well, so they said, let's just make it look like that. So they did. So Land and Water Conservation Fund is federal funded, local government grant program is state funded. They both do very similar types of projects. And since 1999, over $90 million has been awarded to local government grant outdoor recreation projects throughout our state. Just kind of give you a little history, kind of where we've been the last couple of years, since we've kind of taken a bit of a zigzag path recently, primarily because of the pandemic. But I kind of look back to 2019 as really the last kind of what we might call normal year that we had. In that year, we had received 54 grant applications overall, both with large, small, and planning grant applications. And we had about $6 million to award. In 2020, we received, again, 54 applications, and then the pandemic hit. And so we took a real cautious approach and we picked a number of 5 million, thinking that that was the amount of money that we could realistically cover if we had to, if something happened with our funding. And so we took a very cautious approach that year. And then in the next year, we didn't even offer a program in 2021, because as you may remember, lottery funds kind of dried up when they closed bars and restaurants and so forth. And so we just put the whole program on hold to take a wait and see posture. Later in 2021, things started to reopen, lottery funds started to rebound, and the lottery money actually started flowing back in pretty normally. And so when we offered the cycle again in 2022, we had 2 years worth of funding basically to work with and a lot of pent up application ideas. Not only that, we discovered that a lot of communities had additional COVID stimulus money to use and apply as their grant match. So that made for a very active year last year. We received a record number of 77 applications, and we had about 14 million to work with in awards. Now, what's that do for this year? This year, we think we're back to more of a normal cycle. Lottery funds still are increasing. So we think we have, we're projecting that we'll have about 7 million to award. And I'm guessing, my prediction is we'll probably receive a high number of applications again this year, because I think a lot of communities still have a lot of leftover COVID money that they can use as part of their match. So it should be a very active year again. Specifically for this year, if you look at that center column, we operate in terms of a biennium. And so we're coming into the first year of the biennium, coming up the 23-24 year. So if you look at that green column right in the middle, if we start out with what we anticipate to be about 7 million to award, we allocate 150,000 right off the top for small community planning grants. And then we split the remainder costs, there's the remainder funds, the 6.8 million there right in the middle of the page in the green column. We split that 15% for small grants, 85% for large grants. So we anticipate that we're going to have about $1 million to work with for the small grant category and about 5.8 to work with in the large grant category. Small grants are defined as grant requests up to 750,000. That is the most common request. The average actually is around 60,000. The large grant category is capped at 750,000. And again, in this last cycle with a lot of money, that was the most common request, but the average was actually 518,000. Acquisition grants can go all the way up to $1 million, and that's typically that ranges between 500,000 to $1 million for acquisitions. And then small community planning grants are capped at 40,000. Now, when we say grants, we're really talking about reimbursement grants. And I want everyone to understand that. When you apply for a grant from us, you get an agreement, and then you initially need to pay for project costs out of your own agency budget, and then request reimbursement from us. You would pay for the bills and then submit documentation to us confirming that you have paid these bills, along with documentation saying when the bills were paid, who the vendor was, the payment dates, the payment amounts, that sort of thing. And then we reimburse you. Say if it's a 50-50 grant split, you would be reimbursed 50% of the cost for eligible expenses. Eligible applicants to the local government grant program are cities, counties, parks and recreation districts, port districts, and metro. Now, if you're in the audience today and you're thinking, oh, I'm not one of these entities, you can participate. If you're very active in your city or your county parks department, and you have a great idea and you kind of have their blessing to kind of run with an idea, you can cooperate with one of these eligible agencies and work to create an application. But you have to have their blessing, and the application literally has to come from one of these eligible applicants. All applicants need to come in with a portion of match. Our larger cities and districts need to come in with a 50% match. Cities and districts with a population over 25,000 and counties with a population over 50,000. For our medium-sized cities and districts between 5,000 and 25,000 in population, they need to come in with a 40% match, and the same thing for counties with populations between 30,000 and 50,000. And then our smaller communities with populations under 5,000 need to come in with a 20% match, and likewise counties with population under 30,000. Match can include a number of different things. Obviously, just your own agency budget is the simplest and the most straightforward. You know, cash always spends well. Also, your agency labor and any equipment that you have that you can apply to a project, any materials and supplies that you might have on hand, any other types of federal or private grants or donations are all fair game to be applied as match. Actually, the value of land can be applied as match as well. If you've purchased land within the last 6 years with the intent of adding it to your parks inventory or conservation inventory, and it has not been dedicated for park purposes prior, you can use that as your match. So if you bought a piece of property for $300,000 and the intent is that you would add that or develop it as a park at some point, if that's occurred within the last 6 years, that can act as your match. Of course, that needs to be supported by an appraisal. An appraisal is the yardstick that we always use to establish value. And then if you have any kind of pre-agreement costs that you've devoted to that property, if you've done any kind of platting or surveying, appraisals, that sort of thing, any of those costs that have occurred within the previous 2 years, those can also be applied to your budget as part of your match as well. They need to be identified in the budget, and those costs cannot exceed 15% of the total project costs. So hypothetically, if you had a $100,000 project, 15% or $15,000 could be pre-agreement costs in your application budget that could be applied as part of your match. If you want to include any volunteer labor as part of your match, there's certainly ways to do that. And if you're anticipating using any skilled laborers like heavy equipment operators or masons, we encourage you to go ahead and use BOLI rates because they would have those rates for more skilled individuals. If you had maybe more of a group of volunteers come in and do invasive species eradication in a marsh or something like that, that would be more like just kind of your general run-of-the-mill non-skilled labor. And we'd encourage you to go ahead and use what we refer to as the independent sector rate. This is an independent agency that rates the value of a volunteer hour throughout the states. In Oregon in 2021, the latest data that they have published, 1 hour of volunteer labor in Oregon is valued at $29.75. So that is a number that you can use as volunteer labor. Of course, all volunteer labor needs to be documented, and we need to see copies of timesheets and the hours worked, when worked, the dates, who did the work, and then it all needs to be signed off by some type of a supervisor. If you have any materials within your own inventory, that's certainly fair game that you can apply as match to a project. If you use any of your own equipment, most agencies have an hourly rate schedule. That's how you would calculate the value of equipment that you have applied to a project out of your own inventory of equipment or rental equipment. Okay, moving on to the types of projects that we deal with. The types of projects that we cover are acquisition of property, development, acquisition and development combined, rehabilitation, and small community planning grants. And of course, the focus of these is all outdoor recreation, and these properties all need to be open and accessible to the public at large. Acquisition means the acquisition of land and water for public recreation purposes. And this can be property for new park purposes. It can be additions to an existing park. This can be property to expand a trail network or even open spaces for conservation. Acquisition projects always need to be verified with an appraisal. And if you are doing an acquisition just within the local government grant program and you do not anticipate that there's ever going to be federal funds involved, then you can do what's referred to as just a standard commercial type appraisal, the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practices type appraisal. But if you want to also possibly apply at some point to the Land and Water Conservation Fund or the Recreational Trails Program or involve any other federal funding, then you would need to jump up to the federal approved appraisal, which is the Uniform Appraiser Standards for Federal Land Acquisitions, usually referred to as a Yellow Book appraisal. So you kind of want to look at your project and see down the road, and we're going to just basically be dealing with non-federal funds, then go with the standard appraisal. If you think you're going to have federal funds involved in the project at any point, you might as well go ahead and get the Yellow Book appraisal now. There's also a second layer to this. Once you order an appraiser, we do ask that you also have that appraisal reviewed by another appraiser. This is commonly referred to as a desk appraisal. And basically that's kind of a check and balances. You have the number one, the main appraisal, and then you pass that off to for a desk review, and they go through and they basically confirm that the methodology and the process was all appropriate, and they usually arrive at the kind of the same conclusion, but it's basically kind of a double check type system. Initiating both the appraisal and the appraisal review are the responsibility of the applicant. And we do need to have those completed at time of application. I know that's often a challenge, but this is something that, unfortunately you just need to plan ahead on the appraisal because it is kind of a time-consuming process. Those appraisal costs can indeed be included as part of your match. Now, there is a little bit of an exception here. If you have a small piece of property within your jurisdiction and you want to buy that and add it to an existing park, it's kind of an odd shaped piece of property that you don't believe the value is even over $25,000. We have a process called the waiver valuation where you can cooperate with an established realtor in your area and have them order some comps for the property and draw up an opinion and write a letter to us and include that with your application. And they say, based on these comps and my opinion of the market and this particular piece of property, it's valued at $22,000. If you can do that, then you don't need to go through the whole expense of an appraisal process. And we wouldn't want you to either for a small valued piece of property. Now, there's another situation that might come up too, is if there's a piece of property within your area and it comes on the market and you've kind of had your eye on it all along saying, man, that'd make fantastic park property, but it goes on the market and it's going to be, you think it's going to go fast because it would also be good for commercial development or residential development. If you jump on that and buy it and then send us a letter and say, look, we felt we needed to buy this property now because of the opportunity would be lost if we didn't, and it meets our park property goals wonderfully. And if you can document that in a letter, send that to us, and you're requesting basically admission into the next grant cycle, we can send you a waiver of retroactivity, basically saying that gives you permission to apply in the next grant cycle for acquisition assistance. Now, it gets you into the next grant application, even though you've already purchased the property, and there's no guarantee that you'll get approved, but at least it does get you into the next grant cycle with the possibility of maybe getting some grant assistance for that acquisition. When we think of development projects, we think of creating something new, some new outdoor facility, and typically in accordance with the SCORP or some sort of comprehensive plan within your community, or some sort of parks master plan, or some sort of local planning effort. We always like to see some sort of planning effort that involves community input into any of these projects. And of course, as you can imagine, outdoor recreation development projects can include the whole gamut from, ball fields, playground equipment, picnic areas, trails, water trails, bike facilities, swimming, boat facilities, fishing, camping, you name it. Anything that's outdoor recreation is pretty much fair game. Now, there are some other facilities that are not necessarily directly apply to outdoor recreation, but they're extremely important to outdoor recreation and supportive. And those, we refer to those as support facilities, and that would include roads, parking areas, restroom buildings, picnic shelters, kiosks, walkways, landscaping. That's all fair game within a development project. And one thing in particular here, restroom buildings, typically we do not fund enclosed, roofed, walled buildings. However, restroom buildings is the one main exception. We obviously do a lot of restroom buildings within outdoor recreation facilities because restroom buildings are very important. Moving on to rehabilitation projects. This basically means the rehabilitation or bringing something back to life that's kind of been moved beyond its life expectancy. There's a possibility it could have been damaged by either fire, natural disasters, vandalism. It may not meet health and safety codes. It may not meet the access requirements for accessibility for ADA, and it might just be changing recreational needs. It's in the last number of years, we've seen a lot of courts get restriped for pickleball because pickleball has become very popular. Any kind of a rehabilitation application, we do want to see photos confirming what needs to be fixed or repaired or brought up to speed. We do ask for photos for all of our applications because photos are just so incredibly helpful, but particularly for rehabilitation projects. Small community planning grants. We typically allocate $150,000 to this category, and the maximum planning award is $40,000. And this is capped at cities and districts with a population less than 10,000, also to counties with a population less than 50,000. We break it down a little bit farther in that our smaller communities need to come in with a 20% match, those cities and districts with a population less than 5,000. And then there's a 40% match required for cities and districts with a population between 5 and 10,000. These planning grants can be used for a system-wide park and recreation plan, so it can encompass all the parks in your community, or it can be a specific park site, a site-specific plan, or it can be for community or regional trail system within your community. I will also add that within the application there, we have a number of embedded resources as part of the application. And one of those things is this 2013-17 SCORP Appendix A planning guide. This is really quite a good work and has a lot of planning information included in it. So if you're considering a planning grant, I encourage you to take a peek at that. Now, when we say planning grants, we're not talking engineering. We're talking bringing in typically a consultant to work with your local citizens, and to develop a lot of community and public input into what the community wants. The goal, of course, would be end up with some sort of a master plan that will guide future development, something that you can refer back to and quote when you're applying to us for, say, a development grant or any other agency for that matter. So some things that are not eligible within the program, like I mentioned earlier, indoor facilities, community centers, indoor swimming pools, historic buildings, meeting rooms, maintenance buildings, etc. Those things are not typically eligible. Now, the one exception to that, obviously, of course, is restroom buildings. Routine maintenance, of course, is something that we would hope that you would be taking care of on your own in other ways, so that would not be eligible. Professional facilities that are basically designated for like semi-professional arts or athletics would not be eligible. We want these facilities to be open to the public. Exhibit areas, not eligible. Exclusive use areas, only open to one particular group or organization or a type of team or whatever, that wouldn't be eligible. Acquisition of historic sites would not be eligible. We have other programs within our agency actually that can help do a lot of help with historic type situations or archaeological type situations. And then again, the acquisition of lands to help meet with public schools, minimum size requirements, etc. A lot of schools have playgrounds that overlap with a community playground. There has to be real clear lines of demarcation there before we can get involved in that. And again, the reason is that we believe that the school districts have money to work with their own playground facilities. So that's where the dividing line is. One key factor in all of our applications and projects is ownership. You need to have control of the property. So you need to either own the property outright or have a lease or an easement to determine that you have control of the property for a minimum of 25 years. If we're going to put local government dollars into a project, we want that money to stay there, or those facilities to stay there for the next 25 years minimum. Okay, how do we score the applications? We rely heavily on the State Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan, referred to as the SCORP. This is a huge body of research data that is completed every 5 years, and it surveys a myriad of people throughout the state, both recreational users and recreational providers, and just compiles an incredible amount of data and tables. About half our application is built on SCORP results and survey results. The SCORP is actually embedded with the application, so it's an easy reference point for you there. But if you want to look at it outside of that, if you go to any of our OPRD website pages and just type SCORP into the search panel, it'll take you right to it. This is the actual scoring criteria. As you can see there, points 1 through 3 are heavily SCORP laden. This is, there's what, 55 points right there just in SCORP related questions. And then moving on from point 4 on down, we call out bicycle and pedestrian projects. We give that a special point category. Physical activities, special point category. Major rehabilitation. We look at your community support, financial commitment, accessibility, going on down. And then discretionary committee members have 15 points of their own to use based on their own knowledge of their own region, basically, and regions around them, for a total of 120 points. So just moving through some of these, I want to kind of move through some of these questions and how they're kind of constructed within the application and how you'd answer them. So the first category here is a consistency with statewide priorities. This is a pretty broad category within SCORP. This category is worth 20 points. Does the project address any of the statewide priorities identified in the 1923 SCORP? And if so, what needs are addressed? We even point you to the tables. In this case, you can say see tables 12.1 and 12.2, pages 216 of the SCORP. So as you can see, you will need to refer to the SCORP for your answers. Those tables refer to public recreation provider identified needs on a statewide level, and then also the Oregon resident identified needs on a statewide level. So when you jump out to that table, this is what you will see. As you can see, this is table 12.1 and 12.2. So the top one is Oregon provider survey, so people that provide the recreation facilities. And then the second table is Oregon resident outdoor recreation survey, actually users. And then this is divided left and right columns You can see on the left, close to home priorities, and on the right is dispersed area priorities. So most likely you'll be looking at the close to home priorities, a facility that's within an urban growth boundary. So if your project contains community trail systems, restrooms, children's playgrounds and play areas built with manufactured structures, picnic areas, et cetera, these are what you'll want to list in that answer. It's pretty straightforward. It's actually fairly objective. And same thing for the next table down, 12.2, close to home. This is what Oregon residents say that they want to see. And again, if your project touches any of these areas, that's what you want to include in your application as your answer. The next SCORP category, consistency with statewide issues. And this has to do with aging, an increasingly diverse population, families with children, and low-income population. And back up to the question, it says, does your project address any of the following 4 issues identified in the SCORP? And if so, what needs are addressed? And again, this will point you directly to the tables you need to consult, tables 12.3 through 12.20, pages 216 through 223. So as you can see, there's going to be a wide range of data that you can comb through on this one. And it starts off by just identifying high priority counties, high priority UGBs. And again, this is kind of, you can see where it's even broken down a further to young old population, the top one, down to the middle old population in that bottom category there. Apparently I am now within the young old population, which I guess it's nice to be told that you're young within some category, even though they're using old in the same title. But anyway, if your project falls in one of these regions, that's what you will want to cite. And then it's broken down even further. As you can see, this table, again, it's broken down quite a bit more geographically. Basically, this is what you can see at the top there, the young old population SCORP funding priorities. This is what Oregon Resident Outdoor Recreation Survey said in their responses. And as you can see, the top heading there in green is camping opportunities, then actions to increase outdoor recreation engagement. Then the next one down, these next 4 sections are divided up by close to home priority project within urban growth boundaries. So you can see the capital letters are urban area. The next one down is suburban. The next one down is rural. And the next one down is outside urban growth boundaries. So if you're in an urban area, again, the topics that are the hot buttons here are more restrooms, public access sites to waterways, nature and wildlife viewing areas, dirt and other soft surface trails, etc. These are the things you're going to answer if your project touches on any of these items. Section 3 of the SCORP, again, the needs identified. Again, we're going to want to see some sort of evidence that your project is either identified through some sort of recreation provider survey, the Oregon Residents Survey, those are both SCORP responses, or again, a big or there. This is also totally legitimate. Local planning documents, your local parks master plan, or some sort of public workshop or public meeting process. We just want to see some sort of public input into the process that led you to the conclusions that you came to for the focus of this project. Again, the application is going to ask you, does your project include any kind of bicycle or pedestrian trail projects? Or focus, I should say. Physical activity benefits, it'll again throw you out to another one of these tables here for survey data. Major rehabilitation, that's a 5-point category of its own. So if your project includes rehabilitation, you'll want to describe that. Community support, we do give you an opportunity to include letters of support. Letters from other city officials is nice. We kind of expect that, but if you can get letters from actual users, that's usually what the advisory committee really enjoys seeing the most. If you have any kind of survey data that you can include, that's always good to include. We'll also give you an opportunity to describe your financial commitment to it. How's your match? How is your match configured? Is it already approved? Is it ready and waiting, or is it yet to be approved? We'll ask you about accessibility accommodations for handicap access. And then we'll take it a step farther in this question 10 here, universal design concepts. How does your project go beyond just the normal ADA requirements? Does it have anything to do with broadening the net to include senior citizens? Does it broaden the net to include children with certain sensory challenges or things like that? This is your opportunity to describe that here. Sustainability is pretty straightforward. Does your project have anything to do with environmental, economic, or community sustainability? So you can see that's a pretty wide category. And then also we give you an opportunity to describe any diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts that you're making within your community, within your parks, properties, and facilities. In the application, there is a number of tools embedded in the application. There's various online instructions, and of course the manual. Can't stress the manual enough. The manual is a wealth of information, and I left it as a Word document this year so that you can actually do word searches, which makes it a whole lot easier to find topics that you're looking for. So I encourage you to consult the manual. And then of course there's the SCORP planning guide, and I'll just note our two web addresses here. oprdgrants.org I think is kind of the easy one to remember, because that steers you both towards our application site and a drop-down menu to link directly to the local government grant program and the other grant programs that we offer. Or if you go the other direction and just go on through our regular Oregon.gov site, OPRD, that'll get you there as well. So both of these addresses will get you to the same place. Now, in addition to the narrative application, we do have a number of attachments that we do ask you to include. And if you have any kind of construction or concept drawings, we want to see those. There is an environmental checklist. We'll touch on that a little bit later. Land use compatibility form. We like maps. So don't be shy about those maps. We'll like to see a lot of those, and we'll talk about those. And photos, resolution to apply for a grant, state agency review forms. We'll talk about those in conjunction with the environmental checklist. And then if your project isn't for acquisition, we will need to see an appraisal and an appraisal review, proof of a willing seller, which can basically just be a short letter from the seller saying, yes, I'm willing to sell the property to you, and a title report. The environmental checklist packet is a packet embedded in the application so that you can open that, download it, complete the checklist on your own, and then a few more steps, and add a couple of different maps here if appropriate. Eventually, these agencies are going to see the location of the project. So if you can include either a 7.5-minute topography map or a Google Earth map that clearly shows geographical features, or a KMZ file from Google Earth, that would be helpful. And we also include in this packet a state agency comment form. And we're going to ask you to reach out to 3 particular state agencies, for sure, at least you want to check and see if it's relevant: Department of State Lands, Department of Fish and Wildlife, and Department of Environmental Quality. Now, you do not need to reach out directly to the State Historic Preservation Office. We ask that you include a couple of forms for them, but you just need to include them as attachments. If your project is selected for funding, we will submit your project to the State Historic Preservation Office for you. Within this packet you're going to see a state agency contact list. And this is where you're going to want to look and see who you need to contact under what circumstances. So you can see the agencies are listed down the left-hand side, and the contact person is in the middle column. And then on the on the right-hand side is the particulars. So looking at the top one, Department of State Lands, you only need to approach Department of State Lands if you have ground disturbing activity. If you do not have any ground disturbing activity, then you do not need to consult with DSL. Next one down is Oregon Fish and Wildlife. Again, I think they make that note as well. If you do not have any ground disturbing activity, you do not need to contact them. DEQ is broken down by region. So you can see there on the left-hand column, you have Northwest region, Western region, and then as this form goes down, it's Southern region, Eastern region, etc. So you want to look at the right-hand column and see which counties these representatives actually cover, and you'll want to contact the appropriate person here for your region. There's basically a blank form within the state agency contact packet, the environmental checklist, that you would just briefly fill out about your project and then send it by email to these representatives. Now, I will say you want to submit them as early as possible in the process. These state agencies have 30 days to respond. Now, they may not respond to you at all. And if that's the case, then either it means that they were hugely backlogged, or they just simply don't have a comment. And by not responding, they're basically saying, we have no comment. Please don't put pressure on these folks. They do the best they can with the work log that they have, and hopefully they'll get back to you when they can. But they are usually buried in work, and they do have a 30-day window to respond, and they'll get to you as soon as they can. One of the questions in the application asks if you have an agency ADA transition plan. It's just a yes or no question. Either you do or you don't. There's no right or wrong answer to this. And the next follow-up question says, if you do not, then we just ask you to do a self-assessment for existing facilities. So basically there's some tools within the application, just some helpful little graphics on some ADA statistics, measurements, grades, slope, that sort of thing, turning radiuses. And if it's appropriate, if you kind of use those to maybe your rehabilitation project and say, yes, we've assessed the site and we're going to make the appropriate ADA changes, you don't need to submit anything in response to this. We just want to know that either does your agency, yes or no, have a transition plan, or have you assessed the site in your own way to determine that ADA needs will be met. There's also a form, the land use compatibility statement within the application that we ask you to download, complete, submit to your local planning authority, and then include that as one of the attachments as well. If you want to consider what types of permits you might need to include. And again, of course, if you're dealing anything with the Army Corps of Engineers, you want to get started sooner rather than later. We've kind of already touched on this a little bit, but acquisition projects, you want to get that appraisal and the appraisal review started as early as possible. Secure proof of a willing seller letter or memo from the seller so that you can submit that as way with the application. And if there's any development that's going to occur, we'd like to see that occur within 2 years of the actual acquisition. Okay, now moving on to the actual online application process itself. If you're new to this whole process, if you log on to oprdgrants.org, this is the first page you'll come to. And if you do not have an Access account, you'll need to request one. And to do that, you just click on this link where the green arrow is pointing right now. That'll jump you over to a brief form that you would fill out and submit. And then you will get approved for an Access account shortly after that, and then you're off to the races. When you do have an account, when you log on, this is the screen that you will come to, and this is the area where any new applications will be identified. So at the start of any particular grant cycle, like right now, here in January, we started the local government grant program. We opened that cycle up. The local government grant program has 5 applications in any given year. So out of this 11 here, 5 of these applications are local government grant applications. But if you click on this, this will show you all the applications that are available at any given time. So you can see there's 4 in a block there, 4 local government applications, and then 1 at the bottom, just because of these are listed in date order. The other applications that you see are all heritage related, and you might be interested in those too, depending on your interest. But you would click on the application you're interested, say the arrow right now is pointing to the local government grant program development application. And then once you do, that will drop into your applications table, and it'll be titled as, this is your new application. Once you click on that and open it and title it, then it will be titled just like what I have at the top here, Mark's test application. Whatever title you give to it, then that's the application title from that point forward, and that's you'll continually go back to that to work on your application. In working in the application, everything starts with the edit button in the upper right corner. So just if something's not working right, always just make sure that you expand your screen to its full width so that you can actually see the edit button. This is you can see that there's a collection of tabs here. Project information at the upper left, that's just some straight objective information about the project. And then the next tab down, the financial information, I've opened that up. The block right kind of in the middle of the screen there, you can't actually type into that. That's automatically populated anytime you add line items below. So below the project budget worksheet area is where you will actually build your project budget. When you hit the edit button at the top, and there'll be a blue button appear down in the lower right that will say add line item, and that's how you add line items here. You see here I have added gravel 20,000, CXT restroom 100,000, plumbing 50,000, electrical 20,000. And every time I add these items here, and then of course I added my match is going to come from city budget. You can see the source of funding worksheet right below that. I entered city budget 50,000 and match. So what that did is all these numbers got populated into the upper block, where it looks like I'm requesting 140,000 in grant funds. My match amount is 50,000. The total project is 190,000, and the grant is going to be almost 64%, and my match is 26%. And I needed to come in with a 20% match, so I'm good. So I'm above that 20% threshold. So that's kind of how you would build a project budget. Now, when it comes to building that budget, we want sufficient budget detail to tell the story of the project, but so don't be too brief. We don't want to just see construction 250,000. We want to see some broad categories down. There's going to be, mobilization, earth moving, infrastructure, plumbing, sewer, electrical, curbing, paving, kind of break it down into these broad categories, but don't be too detailed. Don't get down to the nuts and bolts, because something to consider is once something is in the budget, then basically we look back at that budget, and when you said you're going to spend, $1,000 on a bench, we need to see that you spent $1,000 on a bench. So we want to see a budget that tells a good project story, but don't get too far into the weeds on this. Now, if you have a very, very detailed budget from your contractor or architect or engineer, feel free to add that to the attachment section under other. We love seeing that. That's great. But don't do that and then just put construction 500,000, refer to budget in other. We need to have that budget filled out so that our committee members can kind of look at it at a glance and kind of get an overall picture of what the project is. One thing that we do ask on building that budget, and this seems the normal thing to do would be to add a line for contingency. That's completely understandable, but we ask that you do not add a separate line item for contingency. You can have contingency dollars, but we ask that you spread those dollars throughout the entire budget, so that the contingency dollars are filtered into every line item. So that basically the bottom line is here is we want every dollar to have a purpose. We don't want dollars just lumped into a $50,000 contingency line item, and we're not sure where that's ultimately going to be used for. So no contingency items, but you can include contingency dollars in your budget. Okay, so you get your application pretty well done and ready to go. You submit it, and it comes to us, and we start in on our what we refer to as a technical review. That we look to make sure the application is complete. We look at the budget for all the reasons that I just described to you. We look at the scope of works that look like a doable project. You've got all the right high points listed. You have all the attachments included. We do look at past grant performance and compliance, make sure that everything's up to speed and you're current. At that point, we pass on your committee to, or excuse me, your application to the actual advisory committee. The advisory committee is a 10, currently 11 member panel. And you can see these are the different categories. They come from a wide range of representation, both geographically, and you can see, west of the Cascades, east of the Cascades, a larger city, smaller city, and then all the way to the bottom where we have actually 3 people from the public at large. Typically, the advisory committee meets in June or early July to hear grant presentations for the large grant category group, those applications that are requesting more than 75,000. The committee members score each project, and then those scores are totaled and averaged and just put on a ranking list. The committee does not cut up your project or slice and dice it. They take it's either all or nothing. They give it a score, and they they don't say yes or no to any projects. They just put them on a ranking list, and then that ranking list goes to the OPRD Commission. It's kind of like the State Parks Board of Directors for final review and approval. And basically, we line up the list of projects in rank order, and we line those up with the dollars we have available, and we fund them all the way down through the list until we run out of money. That's basically how we function. Applicants, excuse me, applying for amounts greater than 75,000 must make a presentation to the committee. Your presenters will have 20 minutes to make a presentation and answer questions. We recommend allowing about 7 to 10 minutes for questions, because the committee members will definitely want to ask questions. They will have already gone through your application, but they will have questions. PowerPoint presentation is optional. It's not required, but it's certainly recommended, because I don't think I've ever really had anybody not do one. So it's kind of what everybody does. It's the best way to tell your story. PowerPoint presentations should be submitted to me 1 week before the actual presentation meeting in PDF format. This is what advisory committee meetings looked like pre-pandemic. This is kind of what they look like post-pandemic, and they may continue to look like this for the near future in some form or another. It might be a combination, we'll see. Those that are requesting in the small grant category, $75,000 or less, or in the small community planning grant applications, do not need to present to the committee. And these applications are due 1 month later. This might be a little confusing in the online system. You'll notice this, that all the applications are stated that they're due on April 1st right now, but the system only allows us to put one date in the system at a time. So once we pass the due date for the large grant category, then we immediately change the due date for the small and planning grant categories, which are May 1st and May 15th, respectively. These smaller applications are viewed by a separate in-house OPRD committee. Just kind of looking at the time frame, we like to open up the local government grant program in January, as close to January 1st every year as possible. Today we're in our February webinar. Large grant applications are due April 1st. And then right after that, they go into technical review, and then small grant applications and planning grant applications are due May 1st and May 15th. We review the large grant applications in mid to late June, early July. And then in that similar time frame, we look at the small grant applications as well. And September is when the OPRD Commission has their opportunity to review all the applications that have been vetted by the advisory committee. And then during October, November is ideally when we can get these agreements out to the successful grantees for their review and signing. And then we send out notice to proceed letters to them right after that, and they can start in on their projects. So you can see this whole application process, just about a year-long process from beginning to end. It's very important that you not start any project work until you receive a notice to proceed letter for us. If you want anything to be reimbursed, those items need to occur within the confines of the agreement date parameters. Some responsibilities for grantees. We do ask that you submit quarterly progress reports. Particularly once any activity with your project starts, and we definitely want quarterly progress reports. We do strongly encourage you to keep accurate project records. We want you to track all your project expenses. It's best if your accounting department can assign a project code to any of the expenses associated with your project, so that you can just kick out a report based on that code for all your project expenses and payments. If you have any kind of staff time that you used as match, of course, you want to track those times and have documentation to back that up. Same thing for volunteer timesheets. And if you've used any materials or supplies or donated equipment within your inventory, you'll definitely want to have documentation for that so that you can get credit for that as match as well. To request reimbursement, then you will actually go into the online system just like you did for your application. It's very similar, and you'll want to upload copies of your paid bills and proof of payment, reports from your accounting department, so forth, and list your expenses, turn in your documentation. You send that to us, we review it, and then we reimburse you based on that reimbursement request. You will have a 2-year window to complete your project. Once you receive your notice to proceed letter, that starts the 2-year clock ticking. If you run into any kind of time constraints at the back end, amendments and extensions are possible, but they're not necessarily guaranteed. You'll want to be giving us warning of that through your progress reports before you come up against that. And if you do need an amendment or an extension, you want to, particularly an extension, you want to request those at least a month before your end date, so we have time to process that. Of course, any projects that you do within with grant funds need to be meet ADA requirements. And one thing that I strongly encourage, I know you can't foresee all the hiccups in the future, but if you, to the best you can, plan for staff transition. In any given year, we see situations where someone has a great vision for a project, they champion that project, they get it through the process, they apply, they're awarded the grant, and they start into it, and then they leave their agency and they turn it over to somebody else. And then a year and a half later, it seems like things have gone dark. We haven't heard much from the agency. We haven't seen progress reports. And then someone contacts us and says, oh, by the way, here's a bunch of bills. I understand you're supposed to, you're gonna pay us for these. And boy, if you can plan for transition, if you're gonna be leaving your agency, if you can pass this information off to another person, that would really be helpful for both you and us. Once your project is completed, we do like to see a sign of your own creation or one provided by us posted at the site acknowledging OPRD grant support. And I will just say that we are sort of in the middle of creating a new sign format, so we might be a little behind on getting a sign to you right now, but we'll see what the future holds with a new sign possibly. Park and recreation facilities that are developed with local government grant assistance must be dedicated for park and recreation purposes for a minimum of 25 years. Any project money that goes into an acquisition, that park property or conservation property needs to be dedicated for park and recreation purposes for perpetuity. And if you do an acquisition, we will actually provide you with a notice of grant that basically states this, and that will be recorded with your deed so that that land stays in recreational use for perpetuity. We define conversion as the act of converting local government grant program funded property or facilities out of public outdoor recreation use. So if for some reason your park property is encroached upon by a new road expansion, a cell tower, a sewer line, whatever. If that property is taken out of recreational use, then it has to be replaced by additional property of equal or greater recreational utility. So if anything like that happens, you want to let us know as soon as possible so that we can start that conversion process. Kind of my final admonitions to you here is that, unfortunately, not every application is going to be selected for funded. There are no bad applications, no bad projects. They're all wonderful, just limited funds. So, don't take anything personal. This is all objective. Some projects actually get selected for funding, maybe even the second or even the third try. We can provide feedback to you after the process is over. Just understand that it usually takes me months to get around to those feedback projects because we have to move quickly right on to getting all the current grant applications processed, and then kind of this feedback project sort of ends up sort of being the last in the lineup of our annual tasks. Okay, how are we doing on questions?
Hey, Mark, it looks like we've got one new one that hasn't been answered yet coming in. Otherwise, maybe we can just talk through some of the ones that were answered. But I'll ask the one that we haven't answered yet. It is, can an applicant request grant funds for 2 projects in the same application? For example, we need help with some outdoor amenities at our new community center, and we also need some rehab to our small pioneer homestead in another park we maintain. If we can apply for funds for both at once under something like improvements to community park facilities, can the fully funded community center serve as match for both projects? Did you catch all that?
Well, there's a couple of things that caused me a little pause, and that's community center. Is this truly an outdoor recreation project? Because we really can't get into rehabilitation or repairs to any kind of buildings or anything that are indoor facilities or that are not truly outdoor recreation, number one. Number two, when it says two projects, we do have a term for that, and that's that bundling is generally not allowed. And by bundling, we mean projects that occur on two separate sites. So the only time that bundling is really allowed is, an example would be, is if you have two parks within your system and you want to pave parking lots at both parks, and you get a great rate on your paving contractor by doing the paving at the same time for both parks. That would be an example of where bundling is allowable. But other than that, no. Generally, you can't mix and match, particularly sites within the same application. That would have to be separate applications. But also, they also need to be eligible projects. In other words, they need to be outdoor recreation related.
Great, thanks, Mark. And that might be a good one too, to get in touch with Mark if you want to dig into the details more about that specific proposal. I do see that we have a hand up from Walt. It looks like we did answer your question, so I'll give you a second if you want to try putting your hand down. Otherwise, we can get you off mute. Okay, thanks, Walt. Let's see what else.
We also have one I noted for live answering.
Okay, yeah, and that was, would equestrian use be considered exclusive use?
I would say no. No, I mean, if it's open to the public and anyone can, with access to a horse, can use that, we might want to take another look at that. But my initial response is to say no. I mean, it would be fine.
Yep.
Yeah, exclusive use is more about not so much the activity. It is more about access being available to all.
Great, thanks, Michelle. Another question, can you apply for two separate projects in the same year? And I'll assume that means two separate grant applications.
You can, and the advisory committee may or may not choose to award both. It is a way of kind of hedging your bets a little bit, I guess. It's not uncommon for an agency to apply for a large grant and a small grant in the same calendar year. So it's a bit of a long shot, but it can be done. And it may come down to where the advisory committee, if they do award one of them, they may purposely not award the other one just for that reason. They might want to kind of share the love around rather than awarding two grants to the same agency.
Thanks, Mark.
Just to add, I'd like to add something to that. So another part of that is that you can only have two grant applications maximum submitted. And if you already have an active local government grant in place, then the maximum amount of applications you can submit is one. So
to the local government.
Yes.
Yep. Great.
Right.
I know that specific cities applying to some of our other programs, and that's fine. Another question, must all trails be soft surface? And the answer to that would be no. You can absolutely do a paved trail project.
Correct.
Can paving for parking adjacent to a recreation site be included as part of the project scope? Example, paving a parking lot adjacent to a tennis court that is being rehabbed.
Certainly, as long as it's all within park property, yes.
Yep. So if it's a parking lot that's not serving that tennis court for some other purposes, that's where it could may not be eligible.
Yeah. If you've crossed the boundary line for the tennis court, if the tennis court is in a park and the parking lot is in someone else's property, then no, it would not be eligible. But as long as it's within the park boundary, yes, it would be eligible.
And then, Mark, can you repeat when a typical notice to proceed would be awarded for the grant?
Once the applications are approved by the OPRD commission, then we send agreements out to applicants for them to review and sign. And it depends on the agency. Some agencies have the capability of signing the agreement and sending it right back within the same day. Other agencies route it to their staff attorney and then to their city council, and that could take 6 weeks. So whenever we get the agreement back to us, we can typically turn around a notice to proceed anywhere from 1 day to a week, usually.
Great. There is a longer part two to that question. It sounds like that project is going through permitting right now, but I am going to recommend, Brooke, that you just get in touch with Mark and maybe dig into those details more about what the phasing would look like, and he can help you out with that. This is a biennium cycle. Does this mean we can wait to apply until 2024 while getting permits and permissions in place? Yes, it opens every year.
Every
So
year,
yes,
an
you could.
annual cycle, yeah.
Mhm. So yeah, you could absolutely spend 2023 prepping and then come in and apply next January.
Our funding is usually described as biennium funding, but we split that in half and we run an annual cycle every year.
And this one, just small planning grants need to submit all the SHPO forms and land use compatibility forms. Mark, do you have sort of separate documentation requirements for those type of grants?
I'm sorry, the small grant category?
For planning grants.
Okay, now planning grant is a little bit of a different animal. No, we do have a lot of the documents. We have them listed as required, but within the planning grant category, it's kind of stood that those are preferred if relevant. So there are a lot of documents within the planning grant application that are listed that, yes, very well may indeed not be relevant. So.
Right, yep, and then recommend with that one too, you might want to get in touch with Mark as you go through that.
Feel free to give me a call or an email on those, yeah, definitely.
Another question about planning grants, can part of the match be a structure that would go into the future park? I'm gonna assume all the match for planning grant probably has to be towards the planning effort.
Yes,
Okay.
correct. It needs to be isolated just to the planning process itself, correct.
Under project narrative item F, major rehabilitation, changing recreation needs dictate a change in the type of recreation area or facility provided. Would changing a field into a park fall under that? Changing recreation needs.
When they say field, my first question is that a grass field that's grass a foot deep, or is it a ball field? So I guess, and overall, my answer would probably be yes, I guess.
A weedy field, she said.
A weedy field.
Yep.
That sounds like development, actually, to me. If it's something that's been, that was a field and it's gone to weeds, then I guess that would be rehabilitation. If it's just a weed field and you want to develop it into a soccer field, that's development. So it kind of comes down to, is it creating something that has been past its useful life into something better, or are they creating something totally new? That's kind of how we look at that.
Great. Another question is, can the site be available to the public by reservation, or does it need to be open at all times? The example being outdoor courts.
As long as they're outdoor courts, and yes, they can be open by reservation, yes. As long as it's open to the public, as long as anyone can make a reservation.
Okay, no more new questions. So if anybody has any more, you can get that in. I did want to repeat one of the questions that came in earlier, Mark, as you were going through the different types of projects, development versus rehab. Somebody asked what the match requirement was for rehab specifically. And I did answer that the match percentage is the same, whether or not it's a development or rehab or planning, but all the match percentages depend on the population of your city or county or service area. Is that correct?
That's exactly right, Jody. Thank you.
And then another one, this might be a call Mark question too, and Michelle did answer it already, but it said, is a bike pump track or a bike park considered a bike trail project? And that's related to those 5 points the committee can award for bike projects. And Michelle did say that it's possible depending on if there's connectivity to a trail system or not. So I don't know, Mark, if you have anything to add on that one.
No, I would agree with that. Just an closed loop bike track, pump track would not be considered part of a trail network. But like Michelle said, if it connects to a greater trail network, then that's possible. Yeah.
Great. And another one I just want to repeat too, somebody asked about the scoring appearing to favor project development as opposed to planning. And Michelle did clarify it's a separate application for planning, and planning grants only compete against other planning grants. You just compete in the planning small and large categories. You're not competing planning grants against large development grants.
Right, that is correct.
We got one new one. I'm not sure if I understand this one. Architect obtain projects directly with local parks department. What is that process? I think we might need a little more information about that question.
I would agree.
And if it's about who can apply, it would be the local parks department that would apply.
Correct. Yep.
And then you did get a shout out or two from your fellow young olds in the audience. Yeah.
I just wanted to, just a point of clarification, because I'm not sure if I heard it correctly or not, but when Mark was talking about obtaining a waiver of retroactivity for acquisition, just be sure if you are going to do an acquisition and you need to close on that property that you get that waiver, talk to Mark and then request that waiver and get it in hand prior to closing on the property. You do need that dated prior to the closing date in order to participate in the grant program.
Yeah, good point. Thank you, Michelle.
All right, a couple more questions. The one about architects. So it said, so architects contact local parks department to inquire about potential projects. And if this is more to do with the procurement, the grant recipient or the local land manager, they would be the one to actually go through the bidding process for their project. So if you are a business seeking business, then making those contacts at the local level would be the place to do that, however their procurement process looks.
And
And
practice
yeah.
does go on. I understand that.
Mhm.
Now, some agencies actually contract with like an architectural firm
Yeah.
or contractor.
Mhm.
That kind of is an extended arm of their
Mhm.
city department. So that's a little different. But if it's just an outside firm kind of soliciting projects for the benefit of their firm and kind of working with the city, I mean, again, like you said, the application has to come from an eligible applicant, which would be the city or the county or the Parks and Rec department.
Yep, and then they would fully run their bidding and procurement process.
Correct.
Clarifying question, maximum grant request amount. Mark, do you just want to repeat that or maybe go back to your early slide with those breakdowns?
Small grant category is 75,000. Large grant category is 750,000. Acquisitions are $1 million. Planning grants are 40,000.
Thank you. Yeah, and if you visit our website on the local government grant program section of it, all those breakdowns in the manual are all up there. No more questions unless anybody has another burning one to get in there quick.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you all for taking time to view this webinar and participate. We will post this to our local government grant program web pages. It may take us about a week to get this converted into the appropriate format and put on site, but it should be there eventually. Thanks again. We'll see you.